Hello fiber friends, it's Helene here in Cabin Fever Crochet. Today I'm bringing you a requested tutorial on how I attach the faux fur to my projects. So I'm going to show you a couple of different types of fur and two different techniques that I use. Three actually, but it's really simple. So just to get a visual for those of you who are visual learners, and I hope that helps anybody who likes the yarn but has struggled with it and maybe thought about using it but wasn't quite sure how to or what to use it in. So what you will need is, of course, your little trusty little pair of scissors, a large eye blunt tip yarn needle for sewing in your ends, and one of the applications, and a locking stitch marker, because that is for if you you have your loop on your hook and you need to set your work down for any reason, particularly on this thicker faux fur. I tell you, it is really hard. It's hard to see the stitches, almost impossible. It's really hard to find that loop if you happen to drop it. So good way to find it is if you've got that loop on your hook, just put a stitch marker in it and set it down, because the loop sometimes slips out. Maybe your hand hits the tail end or your running yarn and you happen to pull it through, and it's not fun trying to find it or having to pull out all your work and start all over. So I'm going to show you to start with. This is Red Heart Boutique fur, and this is the colorway Azalea. This is considered a number 7 jumbo yarn. It's recommending a 16mm hook. I don't have any idea what size that is. I'm using what I have. Works just fine. I'm guessing it's about a Q. Just to give you and this is a number 7mm, so this is more than twice the size. Number 7 is, that's a cross, this is an armor hook. This is a cross between a K and an L hook, which I'm going to use another application. This just came with an inexpensive trio that I got with Michaels, and that seems to work pretty well. It isn't numbered or anything, but it's the biggest hook that I have. So this is a hat that I made earlier this season, and just to show you that the hats I thought turned out really cute. Hopefully you can see the entire thing. This is Red Heart Stellar yarn, which is similar to the homespun yarn because of the boucle effect, but this has metallic running through it, which I hope you're able to see that. And this is very simple double crochet in the round all the way down. So whatever you are attaching your faux fur to, particularly on yarn, on the fur that is this thick, you want to be sure that you have stitches at the base of your project that is going to accommodate the thickness of the yarn. And not only your initial stitches, but then you're going to have to go back at the end and weave your ends in, and it can create a lot of extra bulk. So you need to be able to accommodate that and to be able to run your stitches back the opposite ways, just like you do normally in crochet when you're sewing in your ends. And so that'll be nice and smooth and even, and there's enough room to kind of camouflage any of that extra bulk. So I'm going to be working with not that yarn, but this hat that I had made earlier also. Gosh, I really am not exactly sure what stitch this is. It was a cowl that I had started that just didn't work out right in this yarn, so I used the same stitch and turned it to a hat. And I actually think it is a free one by Crochet Dreams, D-R-E-A-M-Z, and it's the one skein chunky cowl. I have that right here so you can see. I believe that's what this is, and she's on Ravelry, and then here's her crochetdreams.blogspot.com. That's where I printed out this pattern, but Yeah, I think that's what I did. I worked from the bottom up, and I started with a foundation single crochet, and I did a couple rows of slip stitch. So my point to this is you do need a good foundation at the base to hold the weight of this faux fur so that it doesn't fold over and start drooping and dragging. And this is the bottom, obviously, but so it doesn't fall forward and drag the bottom down. So what I do is anytime that I can crochet something in and not have to hand sew it, I am all about that, because hand sewing, hats off to those who enjoy it. I'm not one of them. So, and I like simplifying things, make it easier on myself. Why make extra work when I don't need to? And it's not to cut corners and nothing that's going to affect the quality of the piece or overall integrity of it. But if it can come out in such a way that's going to be nice in the way that I want it to, in a more simplified version, then I usually try to come up with that. So when you're starting out, okay, so like I said, you want to have your stitches wide enough to accommodate your hook and the bulk of this. Leave yourself a really good long tail. I'd say a good 8 inches or so, because when you think of it like, say, curly hair, curling ribbon, for example, you can start with the piece that's a foot long, and after you curl it, it's a few inches short. So this yarn, because it's so bulky, it gets just a few curls. You can see how much yarn that I used. So you want not. Whatever you do, don't short yourself. Better to have a little extra left over than not enough and have to start again. Okay, so another thing is I start one stitch back. So instead of going in on the end, I go back one. And again, that's going to accommodate the weight that overall that this will have in the end. So just pull up, put your yarn through in the center of your tail and your working yarn, just like you normally do, okay? Pull up a loop, pull it up a little bit higher so you've got some freedom to work. And again, another thing, so you can see how just by doing that cinched this yarn in already. Another thing is these yarn, both the faux furs I have, actually all three, I'll show you the third one in a few, 0 stretch. So if you are attaching this to a hat or the cuff of fingerless gloves or anything that is wearable in such a way that you need to retain that stretch and recovery, you want to make sure that you have enough height in yarn, not so it's sloppy, but that it covers the distance that you need so it's not going to pull this tight and ruin the integrity of your piece. All right, so once you have pulled up your loop, you're going to chain, you're going to pull up another loop, bring it through, lock that down. Oops, that would help if I use the working end. You ever do that? Grab the wrong end? Okay, so you pull up a loop, pull it through. Okay, now chain 1, skip a stitch, bring it up, and slip stitch through. And be careful not to drop that. Another thing, when you pull through, you can see how thick this is. And sometimes you might have to give a little tug to get it up there. So when you do that, have a good firm grip on your work so that you're not stretching these stitches out and it becomes sloppy. All right, so chain 1, pull it through, skip a stitch, slip stitch on through. Chain 1, skip a stitch, slip stitch on through. You just kind of have to feel your way, and that's another reason why it's helpful to bring it up, because then you see that's my loop right there. You have a nice wide space to bring it through. All right, chain 1, skip 1, slip stitch through. And that's it. That's what I do all the way. Again, if you have to set your work down, grab your handy dandy locking stitch marker. Did you hear that big bam? Gosh, we've had so much snow in the last few days, and then now it's warmed up a little, starting to rain, warm, and it's all melting and sliding off the roof, making big crashing sounds. The first winter that we were here, coming from California, the first time I heard that, I thought we were having an earthquake, because the house, it hits so hard that the windows rattle here and the house shakes. And now it's just like, oh yeah, that's just snow falling off the roof. So anyway, back to the yarn here. So even if you want to take the hook off for a minute and drop that end, you know where it is. And every so often, just check your work. Make sure the loops are down. You want them, even and not snug tight, but you want them uniform, and so you're not going to have a loop tight enough to where you don't have a loop hanging up here, where if you brush a little hair out of your face or something, it's going to get hooked on your finger and then pull the whole piece in a weird way. So as you can see, you've got all these the faux fur that gets tucked in to the stitches. It gets tucked in into the stitches on the body of your work, and also the stitches that you're working with the faux fur. So I just gently, and do it in slow motion here, just gently kind of pick that up. If you don't, I use the tips of my fingers, sometimes my fingernail. You can take your yarn needle, but you have to go slower and very gently, because it can get a little bit hooked and tangled up in here, and you definitely don't want to, again, pull up the loop of your stitch. But you can use that to work through a little bit. I just mostly use my fingers unless I have a spot that just won't come undone. But by going up 1 stitch and the chain 1, skip 1 and slip stitch, keeps it to where it's nice and full, but without too much weight and too much bulk. I tried it several different ways, and this seemed to work out best for the look that I was going for, and the coverage that I wanted too. And what's nice is it shows up on both sides, so it looks like it's just all nicely attached, one piece, one unit. Now, of course, I would not choose this color on this hat. I have a really pretty, it's called mink brown, that if I were to put faux fur on here, that's what I would choose, but I thought this would be a good contrast so you could see that really well. So, okay, so we're just going to say pretend I went all the way around, and I'm going to pull this out, go back there, beginning, and to tie it off. Now this frogs. This one thing about this particular faux fur, it frogs really nicely. It's a little harder to work with because it's so thick and you can't see the stitches, but it comes out very easily. So get to the end. This is all fluffed out the way I want it. Okay, all those pieces out. I tie off a square knot. I hope everybody knows how to do a square knot, but if you don't, it's left over right, right over left. That's it, square knot. So I would cinch that down tight, first this one and then the second one. I'm not going to do that because I'm taking it apart, but just say it's all cinched down nice and tight. So you do have a little bit of a bulk there, but this is where you're going to take one end, and this is the largest size needle. If you have a bigger needle, easier, but I just find my end, push the fur down, and it pokes right through. It's very slippery that way. And I would just weave in my ends. You know, this is of course going to have fur all the way around it, but just weave in the ends. Hopefully where you can't see them, go in one direction, come back a few stitches in the other, and a couple more if you left yourself enough, if it's not too thick and bulky, and you possibly can. You might have to really work it and almost make it get in a couple of spaces, and when you go back the other way, try to go in a little bit different higher or lower direction. And because this is so full, it's easy to camouflage that, and it's exactly what I did in this hat. I just take my, probably trim that little piece, take my time with it, and as you can see, it looks, now I can tell because I did the work, but to the wearer, I don't think here, I think it looks pretty even, pretty nice. Okay, so that's how I crochet this on. I would do it around, perhaps around a scarf, that hooded scarf that I showed in my earlier video that hardly anyone could hear. Sorry about that. It is a larger piece. It's going to take more time to do that, but I just felt that the end result was so worth it. It just, to me, it made that hood. It framed the face nicely, and it added extra warmth, and particularly around the ears. And if you've watched my videos, you know that my ears get cold, so I'm always going to come up with ways to keep that wind out of them and keep them warm and cozy, but without suffocating at the same time. Okay, so I was going to show you this in another, if I can get it out. Oh God, there we go. Okay. Thought I had not cinched that down too tight where it would be really, really easy. Okay, come on, there we go. Got it. Maybe. Okay, so what I was going to show you with this, boy, I don't know if I'm just making it worse or better. There we go, yay! Alrighty, so for example, if you want to use this type of fur around the cuff of a fingerless glove, or maybe a scarf that's this wide and you just want to do the bottom of it, which looks really cute at the base of the scarf. I've tried crocheting it on in such a small space, and it gets really bulky and difficult to work with, especially something like this where you're working in the round and it's small. So I would just do a whip stitch, and that back in there. Again, leave yourself plenty of tail, and I think most everybody knows how to do it, whip stitch. And again, particularly on this bulky yarn, I would not go on the edge of that in that bottom stitch. There's just not enough there to support it. But this is Lion Brand tweed stripes, I believe it is. It's what they're tweed. Yeah. Oh, I have it right here. Tweed stripes. This is a different colorway. I don't know what this one is other than really pretty. This one is Caribbean, and this is a number 5 bulky, it's called, but I think it's a very lightweight. I would call this more of a chunky weight, and a lighter chunky weight at that. This recommends a size K hook, which I think would be fine if you want something a little more drapey. But for fingerless gloves, typically the stitch is going to be tighter to keep the air out, keep your hands warm. I used an eye hook for this. So it's, and I do think that the chunkiness would accommodate this super bulky yarn. Just have to be careful not to get it too thick. So, and just whip stitch around. Keep these a little closer together so you don't see the gap in between. Keep your stitches a little closer together. These get a little more specific. Okay. That's it. Just whip stitch around, and it's going to look a little funny at first, but you have to bring your stitch all the way through. And this one, you do have to cinch down a little bit more than the crochet method. And as with both, this takes a little time. You'll have to do this all the way around, but make sure all your pretty little fibers are out. And you can see how that would come together, and I think that would, you can see there's still some in there that haven't pulled out all the way. So once you've completed it, you just work that around a little bit, and just one turn around is all it takes. You can see there's a gap from the whip stitching. So, and that's why it's important to make sure that all your fibers are pulled out so that you don't see it. But once they are and your ends are secure, you're not going to see that gap. And this, again, does need to be a little bit tighter, but not so tight where you don't have the stretch in the cuff, which you need to get on and off your hand. But I did the whip stitching on the end of the scarf, and it worked up just fine. So there's that. I hope that makes sense. Just kind of want to get through this. And the last one, I have to undo. Only had so many pieces to work with here. Okay. One more. There we go. Okay. And last, I'm going to work with, this is the Lion brand, the Fun Fur, and this is what came in my Secret Santa bag. That was the first time, and only so far, those Secret Santa bags that I had gotten. That was really fun. I'm overall really pleased with everything I got, and even that Mambo yarn, that's a little unusual, I could say. I still think everything was well worth it. So this is a number 5 bulky, and it recommends a K-hook. And here's another one I found. I don't know if this is new to Hobby Lobby or maybe just new to me, because first time I saw it recently, and I bought this for a particular project. This is Haute Fur, Yarn Bees Hobby Lobby, and recommends a K-hook. And this is also a bulky yarn, and it has a lot more fibers on it, the faux fur part, than the Lion brand one. And the main difference is why it seems like it so much more is because they're all different heights. There's some real long ones, medium, and some short ones in there, so it gives more texture, more loft. But this is super silky, really soft. This color, highs and lows of this green called Cypress, I thought was really pretty. So, each one's a little bit different, but as you can see when I hold the two up together, how much thicker this is. But I think it'll be similar to work with as far as now. This does not frog well at all, to say the least. You have to really be prepared and have in mind what you're going to be doing, and have your scissors ready, because if you decide to frog it and it tangles on itself, be ready to cut that thing to bits to get it off, which is what I had to do initially with one of these. Oh yeah, and I was going to tell you something else going back to this yarn for a sec. Is, you know, like when you're crocheting, you crochet from the skein and you just work and pull the yarn as you go. But when you are using the yarn needle, you kind of have to take a guess at how much you're going to need to feed through, to work with, how much length that you're going to need, because you're going to have to feed that all the way through and then work with what you have. I hope that makes sense. So what I do is I figure, okay, about that much to weave in, and then I go once, twice, about 3 times around is probably going to do it, and that's where I cut it. And if I have some left over, that's just the way it is, and kind of a sacrifice I have to make to get that job done. And that's another reason why I prefer to crochet it around if I can. So with this one, I tried several different ways, and it might be different for different projects, but to get the fullness, because what happens is if you just do, say, single crochet all the way around, you can see these stitches at the base down here, and you can see the stitches that are looped around the stitches of the work you're attaching it to. And to me, it doesn't look as nice. It takes away from the fur itself. And this is an end that I have to sew in. It isn't where it came up. So I played around, did a few different things with that, and what I decided on, and kind of, rather than having to do 2 or even a 3rd row around. Now again, I pull the loop through just like I normally do in crochet. These two, the working yarn and the tail, I do pull through together, lock that in, cinch it down. I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to do 2 single crochets in each stitch around. And because I don't have a base stitch here, I started with the cuff and the basic ribbed stitch, where it was, I don't know if it was this a double or a single crochet, but it works up and down, so it leaves kind of an unfinished edge, if you will. So I'm counting, this is my base, and I'm going 1 back from that to give a nice, gives a good fluffy edge and keeps it from rolling over. And just fit. Sometimes you might need to do 3. Just fit it in there. 2 stitches in each one, and some might be a little tight. And then you can also lock this in a little more by just crocheting right over your tail for several stitches. And just 2 stitches at least in each. Then I just toss that aside so I have enough to weave in back the other way. I don't have to toss it quite dramatically as that, but it's kind of where it landed. Okay. 2 stitches, 2 single crochets. The finer the faux fur is like this, the more you're going to need more stitches to give the fullness. And to cover up, you can see the loops of the stitches below. And this one you don't want loose, but again, you don't want it real tight because you need to have that stretch for the cuff in order to go over the hem. So that's all I do, all the way around. two, maybe even stuff a third one in there. You're not going to see it. The more you have, the nicer it's going to look. But I don't want it to look overstuffed or bunched either. So I thought for the glove that two was enough, and after I fluffed the whole thing, and again, you do have to be kind of careful with this to make sure that you get all your little pieces, but without pulling up a stitch. So I just gently go around and around, might set it down a couple times, and then go back to it, look at it from different angles, make sure I didn't leave anybody out. So that is exactly what I did here, and this is the after it's been fluffed out, and that's what it looks like. I could probably go back and, you know, do a little more. I thought that was plenty enough for me. If you wanted, you probably could go with a little smaller hook, maybe a J hook or K hook. This is just in between a K and an L. And you can just try it, but I didn't want it so big where it's going to stretch out the stitches of my work, but I didn't want it too tight either. So and everybody has different stitch tension too. And the hooks aren't always the same, even though the numbers are. Just kind of have to play around with it. And yeah, so that's it. I've seen some that have the faux fur around here, and that's all, it's pretty and that's fine, decorative. But for me, I make these to be functional, and so that I can use my hands. I have the coverage that I need, but there's my end, my infamous ends. But that I can still use my fingers, whether on the computer or crocheting or something of that nature if my hands get cold. And here's hopefully you can see my hand in there, my wrist. Yeah, I thought so to me this is just something that's gonna get in the way and get hooked on things. But had I thought about this, I did after the fact, but I think if I would make these up again, I think what would be really cute too is to make my cuff twice the size and then fold it down a little bit, fold it over. So you could have it either way. Then you could have a really long cuff if you wanted to, or you could fold it over and have the edging back here, the part of the cuff showing, and with the faux fur trim part way down. I think that would look cute as well. That makes sense. Okay, well that is it. That's it for this time around, and I will hopefully see you soon. I'll be back with I have some other ideas in my head and some patterns and designs that I am creating. So when I get a little bit more set up with the camera, I'll be bringing those to you, and in between then, maybe some more finished projects and a little visiting time. So take care, everybody, okay? And until next time, cheers.